it must be Tuesday evening and time to do a show.
Yes, it is.
And I'm lucky tonight, by the way, everybody, because I have Tanya with me here again. So welcome to the show and thanks for joining me.
I'm the lucky one. So.
No, you're not.
Tell me where Brad
I believe he's on business in Milwaukee or something. That's the excuse I heard anyway. I don't know. If wherever you are, Brad, if you happen to be listening, we hope you're safe.
I thought we were going to get a chance to do this all together.
Yeah, we'll do that one of these days. That's for sure. It would be fun to have all three of us together. Welcome everyone to the Annoying Peasant Radio Show. What is it? The 24th of June today, I believe.
I have no idea.
The only reason
it's summer.
It is summer, yes. Well, actually, it cooled off nicely this evening here.
It's nice. It's very nice here.
Yes, that it is. Tonight we're going to be talking about a number of items. Of course, probably I think the biggest item will be Iraq and or we'll call it the mess that is Iraq. And there's a lot to talk about there, and a whole lot of angles. A lot of interesting articles in the last few days about it. And then we're going to do a couple current event-y sort of news stories that we just chatted about, Tanya and I.
Which I will know nothing about, because I pay no attention to the news, so yeah. Tom will inform me.
Anyway, so if anybody wants to reach us, you can do so on our Facebook page, which, of course, Tanya pretty much takes care of that herself. And actually, that's one of the items I wanted to go over. You posted a couple of cool quotes on there.
There was some cool stuff this week. Yeah,
and I thought they were interesting. I got some reaction from a few people.
Good.
So we're going to chat about those. But our, if I didn't mention this, the Facebook page is, facebook.com/AnnoyingPeasantRadio.
Annoying Peasant Radio.
You can reach us at annoyingpeasantradio@gmail.com. And what is my blog?
You know all this stuff.
My blog is at annoyingpeasantradio.wordpress.com. So that's how you can reach us.
Anything new on the blog?
No, not recently. I can't even remember what the last one was. Actually,
It's work.
it wasn't that long ago. I'm going to look it up while we're chatting
That was
here.
about education?
Oh, wait.
Was that the one?
Yeah, that's what it was. It was about Obama forgiving, basically. And I know the detractors would argue with that word, but ultimately that's what it is. Saying, hey, you guys I guess these were only for the federal loans, or I don't even know, maybe just all those loans are federally regulated. Of course they are, but to what extent? And to the extent of his decree, because again, this did not go through Congress. This was probably, what was the date I did here? June 10th is when I wrote this. So this probably happened June 9th, June 8th, somewhere in there. And
who needs Congress?
Yeah, who needs Congress? Who needs all that stuff? I just looking at the article, I can't remember exactly what I wrote, but I guess I said here, President Obama by executive order announced reforms, in quotes, to the federal student loan debt repayment program. Anyway, if you have any interest there, that might be fun to read. And then maybe the other thing, I have on there a bunch of links, by the way, to other sites and other things. So if you want to use that, that's the idea to get my traffic up. Use it as a jumping off point.
There you go.
To go elsewhere.
That is posted somewhere on the Facebook page, because I did
post
that on there. I gave you an assignment to post it on there, and you forgot, so I did.
And see, I'm very good at forgetting, and I lived up to that. Anyway, all right.
That's right, I got to take my notes of everything we promised to post on the Facebook page.
Yes, and that's hard to keep up sometimes because we go through a number of different articles during the show, and they're like, all right, did I post them all? Did I list them?
I have a pencil.
All right, so we have a secretary here as well. She's on top of it. Anyway, with that, I just wanted to mention a couple things that I thought were in the news that some of them I actually thought were just kind of humorous, so that's what I wanted. And I don't know, for those of you who are news junkies, heard the Hillary Clinton thing. The Hillary Clinton thing. Well, I guess it's in relation to her book. I can't remember. It's like Hard Times, or I can't remember what the heck her book is named. I'm trying to find it here. There was a really cool one on another story on Reason.com, too. We got to get to that one. That was about the Iraq War deal. Let's see. God darn it. I'll find it here.
Too many tabs open.
Yeah, I got 1,000 tabs open. Was it Hard Choices, not Hard Times.
Choices.
Anyway, about her saying that, I think the initial comment that came out of it, she was in Chicago talking to the mayor, Rahm Emanuel, if I have my story straight, which a lot of times I don't. And he commented about her thing. I think it was from the book that she said they were flat broke when the Clintons were flat broke when they left when Bill left the office of the presidency, and that was challenged by Rahm Emanuel. Flat broke. What do you exactly mean by flat broke? See, I think most people that means zero or really close to zero.
Yeah, interesting definition of flat broke.
And even then, she said she's not truly, or they're not well off, or not truly well off. And I wanted to mention, this is from Business Insider. I found a number of different sources. Supposedly, I read one where Bill himself has collected fees between $100 million and $200 million in speaking fees since he's left office. This article here from the Business Insider, I should give you the date. That was June 22nd by Hunter Walker. He says about the more than $100 million her whole family has earned in recent years. Again, fortifying her case for not truly being well off.
What would her definition of truly? What is the amount? That's the question I'm asking.
I think it's the 7 people who have more money than them are the truly well off, and everybody.
Could be.
But yeah, and by the way, part of her definition was here we go. She says they were talking about the income or wealth inequality issue, which has come up recently again over the last few weeks. She says they were talking about that. Well, is she part of this problem of the inequality, etc.? And this is a quote according to this article. It says, "They don't see me." This is Hillary speaking. "They don't see me as part of the problem." She said, "Why? Because we pay ordinary income tax, unlike a lot of people who are truly well off. Not to name names," she says, "and we've done it through dint of hard work." So most of you other people are just getting rich from...
They don't work hard.
Yeah, you don't work hard.
Ordinary income tax.
Yeah.
Maybe she means then like investments in property, or things like that. I don't know, because they're getting their money through like books and speaking engagements. So I guess maybe she's just seeing that's more like hourly wage or something. I don't know.
Yeah, and even in this same article, it goes on. Clinton, she earns reportedly in the $200,000 per speaking engagement. And then he says here, Bill Clinton has reportedly made over $100 million in speaking fees. So he has made over $100 million himself. So earlier in this article, he reports that their families made more than $100 million. And again, I've read in speaking fees largely in consulting, etc. But again, in another article I read, the number was over $200 million. So in my world, those are really big numbers. But I guess you're not truly well off.
I wish that was flat broke in my world.
I just thought that was humorous.
All right.
Really not a whole lot to do with liberty. It's just kind of I'm like, you got to be kidding me. And I know these people are politically well connected. They're very popular people. The vast numbers of people in the United States really support these people and their activities. And some of it is just comical. So.
I don't pay much attention because whatever gets kind of officially reported in the media, just to me, I'm like, it's probably not true anyway. We don't know what's going on behind the scenes, so it's I guess that's my excuse for not following the news. It's all lies.
Well, here's the deal. We'll have a true measuring stick here shortly, see, because I'm working on a book myself, and I see that Hillary got advanced. So that means before the book is done, $8 million. We'll see if I get any such deal. And then
all right.
If I don't, I guess that makes me dirt poor. I don't.
Yep.
Which would be true. I'm not arguing.
Right. Then you'd be truly flat broke.
Yeah, flat broke. Right? That makes me flat broke. Anyway, that's enough of Hillary, but I just thought that was a little comical. And then another one, I got to go back to the Facebook page that you had posted earlier, Tanya, and I just thought that was a couple of great quotes or short one-liners. And even this one here, I didn't even have on the thing.
Yes, that was my favorite. That's my new.
Let's see.
I'm going to be repeating that one.
My thing is, my internet is wigging out at the moment. But libertarian, there's a definition that you posted. I don't know if you want. Yeah. I'm not stealing your thunder.
No.
You go.
Definition of a libertarian is a person who does not follow up the phrase "I believe in liberty" with the word But
And that just struck me so, a chord that I thought was so important because that's almost always what I hear. I mean,
But-
yeah.
there are always exceptions.
Yes, there are
I
exceptions.
guess that's your test. Are you a true libertarian? Can you say, I believe in liberty and stop? Just don't say anything else. That's it.
In my world, which is
The
really
end.
saying, I support freedom. Right? And which seems crazy to say I support freedom except for Thursdays. I don't know.
Right.
After we eat chicken, or it's just insane. And people don't understand. Of course, most people, well, they all do. They think that my exception is the legitimate one. And then, of course, if you have an exception, yours is probably not so legitimate, or at least not
And
as
the only thing that
legitimate
really
as mine.
seems to offend people is when you start saying there are no exceptions. Everyone wants to say, I believe in freedom, I believe in liberty. But when you say without exception, then that's where the objections always come. So it's interesting.
Yeah, which, and instead of saying I support freedom, if you say I support non-aggression, or I support not aggressing against innocent people, I guess aggressing or using force against an innocent person, it seems crazy to say I support not using force against an innocent person, except for...
Right.
What exception would there possibly be for using force against an innocent
when
person?
exactly is that okay?
Yeah, it just seems like you would really struggle to make sense of that one or have something.
It's like you say, it's kindergartnerism. My kids pick right up on that. No, not except for this, except for that. Kids get it.
That's the truth. That is the truth. So I thought I really appreciated
I love
that,
that one.
That was a good one. And since we're on there, I got this one also was a good one. I'll let you take that one.
I knew Lisa would like that one too. Somehow, I always know which ones Lisa will like. Politicians are always interested in people. Not that this is always a virtue. Fleas are interested in dogs. That's PJ O'Rourke.
Yeah, I just thought that one also rang true. That was really interesting. Good sense of humor. That's one of the things I think about libertarianism, and I've actually heard Lou Rockwell say many times. Because sometimes people start to go through this process and they might get a little bummed or depressed, right? There are few comrades,
Yes.
amongst us.
It is a lonely road.
Yes, you're isolated, right? And at times you can get depressed. It's like, geez, what's the point? We're not making any substantial progress. But like Lou Rockwell says, well, once you learn this stuff, part of your satisfaction has to be that you have fun at the state's expense.
Yes.
In other words, make fun of them and have joy in doing that. And I'm with that. I think that's great
that
advice.
Humor is something that you really need because you can get really frustrated and you can feel like you're banging your head against a wall. And there's Bastiat. Bastiat is on there.
Yes.
Always good.
Yeah, he's fantastic.
Every time we object to a thing being done by government, the socialists conclude that we object to its being done at all. And you talk about that all the time.
Yeah.
So.
And one of my favorites on that one is the public education.
Right.
Oh, you want people to be ignorant and stupid?
Right.
Yes, sir. That's
We're not against education. We're not against roads.
Yes. I think they're handy, okay,
Right.
but everybody has their own opinion.
Right.
But actually, roads is a quite complex project. Let's see, is there anything? Yes, this one too.
Yeah.
I like that one. I can't steal your thunder there.
This was a good week for just Facebook quotes. So we just got all this good stuff. The government that just lost 2 years of emails would like to handle your medical records from now on.
Yes, and the state
John Gabriel.
see no problem with that. And I know they'll say, hey, you're just nitpicking on this one. It was a gal, I think. I can't remember what her name was.
Yeah.
But, I mean...
They lost it. And we know, that it's just corruption. And yet we just let that stuff go. I don't know.
Even in this case...
Yeah, you have to laugh. How could you know? What else can you do? Yes, they lost it.
Right.
Air quotes. That's
There you go.
we do air quotes all the time, so we have to notify you when that happens.
But this is interesting. Even in this case, I would argue, let's assume it's not corruption. Give them the benefit of the doubt. It's just incompetent.
They're just idiots.
Yes. So either way, it doesn't
It's
matter.
one or the other.
What's going to happen to my medical records?
Very good point.
I'm going to get hung someday. I'm going to execute it. I don't know. And I'm going to get denied
Something. Yeah.
health care that I absolutely need because the records were lost. And the other thing is, people say, well, it happens to corporations. And I would argue it certainly does, but it happens with less frequency. Why? Because those private enterprises, individuals, are subject to recourse, right? What are you going to do in this case? what what are we going to do? Sue the government? Sue them? Right?
Vote them out.
Vote, there you go.
I just commented to someone, I think it was today, I said, you can't actually vote someone out. You have to vote someone else in. So, it just doesn't work.
That's great insight. I think that's most people lose that idea, because that's vote them out is a very popular slogan.
If there was an option on the ballot that said just vote them out and no other, nobody else in, I'm there. I'm all over that. So
yeah, I find that helpful.
I'll do that. I will participate in that. So yeah,
let's see. All right. Brad's apparently not listening tonight. I just got a text from him. He's busy. Anyway, I just thought it was fun.
I'll have to listen later.
Okay, I got to tell you a goofy story. Was it yesterday? Yeah, I think it was yesterday. 2 guys come into a place of business that I'm loosely associated with, we'll say. Not to name any names.
All right.
I don't want to incriminate anyone who doesn't want to be incriminated. Anyway, these 2 fellows come in, and they're with a lobbying group. For small business. I can't remember the name of the organization. But basically...
How fun.
Yeah. Can you fork over like $400 so we can hire some, I assume, guys, maybe a few gals in there, that have probably, $1,000 lunches with some highfalutin politicians or their aides, right? So, of course, they can't do this at Taco Bell. They got to do this at, $1,000 lunch kind of place and have some wine and dine. So they can bend their ear to bend the rules more in favor. And, of course, they would argue not in favor, just to level the playing field is where they would be, right? In favor of small business. So, of course, since you're a small business, obviously you'd be in favor of this. And the fellas were right there basically starting to sign them up. And before... one of the guys working at this place, one of the owners says, well, I have to check with my partner before we can actually go forward with this. So then I couldn't help myself. I had to chime in. And I said, these guys, I go, well, I think you guys are kind of barking up the wrong tree. And they said, what do you mean? I go, well, 2 reasons. One is, I'm not speaking for this other individual, but I think he's kind of where I am in political theory. And he can object and so of course I just took the initiative and started going on. And I started with, do you know what an anarcho-capitalist is? And they said, no, never heard of that. And I said, all right, let me take about 3 minutes of your time. Anyway, I got them in going in this whole thing. And this fellow who the co-owner was there, he said, that was the best sermon I ever heard you give. And well, it wasn't 3 minutes, it was closer to 10. But I wound up giving our website.
Should have recorded it.
Yeah, and put it up somehow on.
That's funny. I had another conversation with someone it was a very short conversation, but just someone that we kind of bumped into, and it was funny because I said, oh, well, just kind of jokingly said, yeah, well, we're libertarians, we argue about everything. And what is that? Yeah. So it's always fun when you get to kind of explain things to people a little bit.
That would be, you'd be a person who does not follow up the phrase, I believe in liberty with the word but.
We're going to have to work on that. That's like the blur, like when you only have like a few quick seconds to talk with someone, kind of what's the best thing to say? Because
the elevator speech, as
you say, it requires a lot of context, and it usually kind of seems really unusual to people to talk about total freedom or or lack of government, things like that. It's so, how do you kind of wrap it up in a nutshell, I guess? Absolutely.
It's very difficult to do that, and I think that's one of the reasons it's a tough sell.
I thought that was really good, though, about I believe in liberty, and don't follow it up with the word but. I think that would be probably something you could share with people, and it's humorous, but it is actually very accurate.
By the way, another one is a fellow I kind of connected with on Facebook, Anand.
Yes.
He did a post, and I'll put the link to it on the Facebook page, kind of about definition of terms, and I was like, I cannot it was talking about the word liberal, what it means, and how he'll use these terms. And I thought that was just a fantastic idea for clarity, because one of the things, like you had said, I support liberty without using the word but thereafter, right? Well, I think most people don't even know what liberty is in the first place.
Right.
And again, that goes back to that context thing. And so you'd have to define all these terms. Well, this takes time. They don't want to listen. It's just too much work. And I'm going to go eat spaghetti. Goodbye. They're just not on there. And I think that's one of the very tough things. So I agree with you. It'd be great to come up with kind of a very short version And maybe you don't actually give the real definition, but you just do something to pique their interest to want to learn more.
Yeah. Well, and I think it takes patience to even share with someone. You're really good at that, of just sharing those definitions and kind of just going back through the whole thing again with each person. And I'm kind of learning that, but it is kind of like you introduce the idea to people of liberty, and then sort of where do you start? Especially when maybe you won't have a chance to follow up and have long conversations, how to kind of begin and where to go from there. But you're a good teacher, so you're good at that. But I don't know. Maybe you feel like, I think you talk to people sometimes, you feel like you're all over the place.
Yes.
And you're like, okay, I really do need to learn how to explain what I'm talking about in more of a
compartmentalized or in smaller chunks.
Yeah, just kind of to in an organized way.
Yes.
Instead of jumping all over the place, because people start right away with objections, and then you start kind of
defending
this or that. Although I am finding myself more just sort of, I think, so steeped in that basic philosophy that every issue that comes up, you just kind of you sort of have the same response. You kind of always come back to the same thing, because if it's about aggression, if it's about, then no, I'm not for that.
Right. And there's so much to this, and that's where I went with these two fellows, kind of the non-aggression principle, right? I went there with them, and I said, well, the state's a coercive agency, and I tried to kind of explain, hey, they only have one tool, it's force, and I said to them, hey, the state really creates nothing on their own. I know you want to argue with me. No, they built that bridge over there. I'm like, yeah, but where did they get the funding from that? They took it from people who sorta work in a hampered free market. I guess I should say they do work in a hampered market, and hampered free market is a stupid way. It should be a hampered market, sorry. And so they confiscate the wealth in order to do these things. But so you have to move it back one step. Yeah, you see them, I don't know, put their name on the bridge, but where did the wealth come from to create that bridge? From working people who actually create wealth every day. And I don't know, I think I got a little bit, but there are so many other avenues. One of the things I'm stuck on is the nature of man. I think that's very interesting, and it goes back to, was last week when Brad was here. I said, well, we kind of touched on this, and I said, yeah, that's a prelude to my book. Because one of the things I'm touching on is, people think, if I say, hey, there's a distinct nature to copper, for example, most people don't really argue, no, copper's not unique. Copper's like gold. And no, copper's copper colored and gold is gold colored for one, right? And going, well, I argue man has a distinct nature as well. And then people start having trouble with that. But I think freedom is in concert with that, is my point. And anytime you try to do something that's in contrast to man's nature, now you get rubs. Like if you force people to associate, which is what we're going to get to a little bit later, part of the Iraq mess, right? And all of a sudden conflict is, because you're pushing people to be together that ultimately, at least in a certain time frame, don't want to be there until they resolve their issues. So anyway, all those things, and so you can go so many ways in that discussion. It's very difficult to compartmentalize and stick it in 3 or 10 minutes.
Yes. But, well, I don't know if I told you that I think I did, that I had the lady come for the, not the census, but the community survey, and that she did come back to talk to me. Actually, she sent me some stuff. Did I ever end up telling you that?
No, I didn't know the second part.
So I did end up talking to her, and I did end up explaining to her that that we were not going to participate in the survey, and she did all kinds of things to try to convince me that it's a really good idea and how great it is and all the good that it's doing, and and I was able to explain to her that I am saying no because I can. I'm saying no because I don't want to be forced to participate in something that I'm not choosing to participate in, it's being funded by the government, or, I just kind of explained that to her, and she was very nice, and we had a good conversation. But it was interesting because, I said, don't you have people, you're coming back to physically talk to people who did not fill out the stuff that you sent. So don't you have people that say no? She says, well, sometimes people do, but as soon as I explain to them, that their privacy is being protected and that there's nothing, then, they usually just are like okay with it and everything. Really? Like nobody says just straight up, no, I do not choose to participate. So I thought that was interesting, but, yeah, it's another big topic maybe for another show, but it was all those things. The other guy that we talked to who didn't know what a libertarian was doing a survey on the lake. We live near a lake and went to put our canoe in there, and they have to ask you questions because you're supposed to clean off your boat, and there are problems with invasive species being moved from one lake to the other. The legit concern, of course, but then, it all gets kind of crazy because most of these are voluntary programs, but then you get government grants involved, but you get some of these guys at the boat landings that are kind of like mall cops.
Yes.
They're like capacity here. And so we like to talk to people and say, is this voluntary? Well, then no thank you. I would not like to participate or whatever we think is right or good. We're like, rest assured we clean our boat, rest assured we understand these problems and we're not contributing to the problem, but it is interesting, and I guess maybe kind of find little ways to exercise your freedom where you can.
Absolutely.
My husband gets really frustrated with people who try to make him fill out surveys and do stuff, and I always try to say, just take the opportunity to educate someone, just talk to them about why you're saying no. So we're trying to learn how to do that without getting really ticked off.
Well, by the way, I had a conversation or two with your husband today.
You did? Well, that's good.
And he's doing very well on that, by the way. He gave a couple examples. I won't go into them now on the show, but that's important because I think it helps sometimes at the time because it hits home with people when you kind of, I don't know if the right word is confront them, question them, I guess is a better word, at the moment. Because otherwise it doesn't really mean anything to them. It's like, why won't you fill this out? Or why won't you submit to this permit? Or why won't you submit to this regulation or whatever, right? And if you bring that point up, sometimes they're a little, I guess I see where...
Luke's very confrontational, and I'm really not. I don't like conflict at all. So I'm trying to be friendly and trying to kind of get to know the person or, share something with them. He just, communicates in a different way, but sometimes it's really good. It is. Yes. Sometimes he goes straight to the point. He doesn't.
Yes.
He's not afraid to bring things up and be very honest about stuff. But he gets frustrated too, I think.
Which is great because he's a very principled man. So
yes.
The more he has to say, I think the better off we all are.
He didn't want to go down to the lake anymore because the mall cop was at the lake. But we talked to him a little bit, and we got to know him a little bit, and he seems like a very nice guy, and so we're just gonna make him a libertarian.
There you go. All right.
He sits down there all the time, so we're gonna go swimming and...
A potential convert.
Yeah, I'll go down there and talk to him.
Well, really another example of how a libertarian is a lonely existence. You're apparently one of the lone objectors to this survey.
Yeah.
And also...
Yeah.
Right? And it is. I'm sure for them it's very unusual, and they're like, what? Because I just explained it to most people, and apparently they've never heard of the NSA. I don't know.
Yeah. Most people that do stuff like that love the word mandatory. If they say it's mandatory, it's required. Right. And I don't think anybody ever follows that up with explain mandatory.
Yes.
Yeah. Is a gun to my head. Is there a fine? Will I be arrested? If not, no thank you.
Exactly. And everybody has to draw their own line of where they want to push that.
I checked that with the community survey thing because we got threatened actually when we would not fill out the regular census. Lady said she was going to call the sheriff.
Yes, I heard that.
And Luke said, yeah, well, go ahead. I know the sheriff. I'll call him for you.
Yeah.
Anyway, but that was funny. But then you kind of got to look up and say, well, okay, I know there are laws that say this is supposed to be mandatory or whatever. Does anything happen to people if they don't comply? So I looked up the community survey and found out that there hasn't, not in any recent years, has there been anyone actually, they don't really enforce that law. There is a law on the books, but I had a reasonable expectation that nothing was going to happen to me if I said no. So
And
I chose to do so.
I don't fault any. Within the libertarian world, there's some infighting, right? If my expectation is that, say, you would object to it and say you chose not to, a lot of people, well, hey, what are you doing? Why didn't you, question the authority? Why didn't you stand up against the state, right? And I think that's actually a bad thing within the libertarian community. I think everybody has to make their own decision. Hey, if you want to risk going to jail or having a gun to your head or whatever, that's up to you. That's a completely personal decision. And I think a lot of libertarians overstep their bounds when they try to push people to...
Yeah, you have to weigh the risks and benefits.
Absolutely.
I mean, when you're talking about a state that does use force against people on a regular basis, you've got to decide what you're willing to risk, or fines or things like that. Just...
Right.
It's not an easy thing.
You could wind up in the clink, and that's not a fun experience.
Well, and I admire people. There's guys like Adam Kokesh and people who, really go hardcore, and I am glad those people are out there, but I don't feel that in my situation with my family and all my kids, I can't necessarily take that stand, or I don't choose to. I mean, I suppose I could, but I do really admire most of the time people who do.
Right.
We need everyone to do that. Some people are going to really resist those laws and make that point, and then there's us. We're just going to talk about it.
We're trying to educate.
And my husband is going to confront people and bring those things to light, and we all have something, I think, unique to bring.
Well, one thing I have to clarify so people will understand, when we talk about Adam Kokesh and other people, and I'm no Adam Kokesh expert, so I don't know all what he's been doing. But, this whole deal, if you're truly an anarcho-capitalist, I don't know, I call you a capital L libertarian, all kinds of words, it's non-violence that we're talking about, right? And people, I think, a lot of times assume very quickly that, you're for violent revolution.
Yeah.
Right? No, that's exactly what we're not for. And even if a bunch of libertarians got together and overthrew the government in a violent way, it wouldn't get us to where we want to go because they're using the wrong means. So it would essentially just be a coup, which is what we've essentially had. The world's had how many thousands of times? It
turns right back into the same problem again.
It doesn't work. We already know that. The only way to do it is educate people to change the will of man. That's what it ultimately takes, and how much effort that takes to do that, I don't know. I don't know if anybody knows.
Well, I was in a Facebook conversation just over the last couple of days, and a couple of conservative friends said that, we need another George Washington, we need another Ronald Reagan. And I said, I think that we need to stop believing that we need overlords.
Exactly.
So I like that word. That's Lou Rockwell's word. That
overlords, yeah.
That's what it's. They were saying, what's it going to take to wake this country up?
Yes.
I said, I think that's what we need. We don't need another ruler, another great leader. We need self-government.
One of yours on Facebook, too, was something like, if you can't trust people with freedom, I can't remember how can you trust people to oversee them or something
right.
like that.
If you can't even trust people with their own freedom, how can you trust them to rule over other people? That doesn't even make sense.
It's crazy. That was also one of the things that came up with these two lobbyist guys. I'm not describing them properly, but I said, well, wait a minute. Wasn't it you guys are advocating that we use the political process to, in their words, basically their idea is to level the playing field. And I'm like, but didn't the political process, isn't that what got us to where we are today? Mm-hmm. So the tool that basically screwed us over is the tool we're going to use to fix it? I don't see it. It's like I'm going to overtake the mafia because what I'm going to do is I'm going to morph the mafia into this giant peace-loving agency. We're going to spread peace and love across the planet.
Well, it's like our healthcare system. It's like, nobody can afford healthcare anymore because the system is so regulated that it's just a mess. So we need the system that created this whole problem now to take it over and fix it for us. So fix it even more. Thanks a lot. You did great the first time.
Absolutely.
That doesn't work.
Yes.
So, yeah, that's interesting. Although I think, and I've been thinking about this a lot talking to you lately, that in some ways, you've got all these different groups in society, and in a democracy, minority always loses.
Yes.
So when you find yourself in any kind of a minority group, you do sometimes feel like you have to fight back just to preserve what little rights
Yes.
you have left. So that, I was kind of thinking about that from a political standpoint of, most of the time I would choose not to participate in the political process. But at the same time, I'm part of several different groups. I mean, we homeschool, things like that. And at different times when you feel threatened, we don't vaccinate our kids. Well, I have just seen a lot of articles and just comments where people say these parents should be thrown in jail and they should lose their kids and all these things should happen, and it's like, it's very threatening language from people who want to use force against you, and you do feel like, well, how can I defend myself against that? And so, I don't know if it's really effective to ever get involved in the political process, but it is like you have these little groups and everyone feels like they have to fight. And as soon as your group then gains enough power to be in the majority or to have the approval of the majority, we're in like the gay rights issue is kind of right there right now where it's kind of crossing over into that majority status. And I'm kind of watching that and going, okay, you've always got somebody who's on the bottom and somebody who's shifting to the top and shifting to the majority.
Right.
And then you always have another group then that has to fight and scratch their way to the top. I don't know. I was looking at that. I thought it was interesting. Like I said, we're all over the map here, but
yeah, that's what we do here, though. So that's fine.
We do. I was just
we'll get to a rock.
Majority. Was another. We have so many Facebook comments. There are little quotes lately. It was, I'm for democracy because I think minorities are always wrong.
Yes.
Yeah.
We've summarized this. Might makes right. Right.
Yes.
You have the bigger numbers, so you impose your will on the others.
And what do you do when you're in the minority?
Right. You take it. That's what happens to you, right? And the whole notion, though, of my rights would be subject to a majority, a minority, or to anyone seems crazy to me, right? It should be, no, my rights are my rights. They're not negotiable. But apparently in a democracy they are, and that's the way democracy... And I don't know how many times I've had people say, Tom, you don't understand how democracy works. I said, well, actually, I do understand. I object to it is what I'm saying. Hello?
Well, if you can get enough people, if someone can get enough people who don't want you to exercise your rights...
Done.
Yeah, then you don't have them.
Right.
So,
just go to the voting booth and it's over.
Right.
So anyway, I'm a little tardy on. I like to do every 30 minutes. It's now been like 37. You are listening to the Annoying Peasant Radio Show. We're talking about some current event issues and, I don't know, some topical libertarian stuff at the moment. But we're going to get to a rock here in a little bit. But thanks for joining us tonight.
How are we going to stick to an hour? We haven't even gotten to our topic.
I know. I'm not very good at sticking in.
We're always on topic, though, because we always have one topic that's liberty is our...
I should mention this. I think you alluded to a fantastic point. For anyone who's a new listener, Tanya said, well, you call this kindergartnerism. And I do, because I actually think I only have two tools to argue with, really. And I would call the non-aggression principle and private property rights born out of self-ownership, and there's a whole big explanation there. But it's those two things. And I always like to go back to the Walter Block thing for the property rights people so they can kind of understand that. He used an example one time. He was lecturing somebody, and he got on the topic of private property. And he said, hey, if I see, there's two fellas sitting in the front row, and he says, if I see a guy reach over and he's grabbing the other guy's sweatshirt, what am I witnessing? And of course, most people say, well, that guy's stealing his sweatshirt. And you say, but wait a minute. See, here's the assignment of property rights matters. What if that shirt had been taken by the other fella the day before? So what you're actually witnessing is essentially the repossessing of his own property, right? Most people jump to the conclusion because it happened to be in his possession. That means he actually owned it, which... Again, in this example that Walter Block, I think is a good one, points out is not necessarily the case. So it's not stealing if it's his property, right? If I'm the one who appears to be taking something, but it's actually my property, it's not stealing, right? And if it is not, in fact, not my property, it is stealing. It doesn't matter if I'm just me, Tom, if I wear an official blue suit with a star on it, if I have a whole team of guys and gals with the official suit and a badge and an ID or whatever they have anymore, it doesn't matter. It's still stealing. And people will say to me, well, it goes on all the time in the form of taxation or whatever example they have. I said, yeah, I call that legalized theft. It's still stealing. I realize under this state of system, it's been legalized. In other words, you're not subject to sanction. You won't go to jail for doing a legalized stealing, but it's still stealing, right? And so that, anyway, that's an important aspect. And Brad and I have done shows on how you gain your self-ownership. And that'll probably be part of my book a little bit. I'll touch on that. But a lot of interesting stuff, and as you alluded to, you can go 1,000 ways with this subject, and we're doing so tonight.
There is a basic foundation of everything we're talking about here, and now we're kind of, I think now when we talk, it's just kind of like that's just sort of just a part of everything. Everything we talk about is built on, but it does require some context, like you always say.
For you business people, it's vertically and horizontally integrated.
Oh,
how's that?
Woo! I like the self-ownership and everything. My husband always is big on I own me, you own you, and he just tells everyone he does business with, everyone,
good for him.
Everyone just I own me, you own you. That's how
how
this will be our relationship.
Exactly.
And that's how it works. And that's great. And people, he's kind of been telling me lately that people respond to that. After a while, they get to know him. And yeah, okay. I think that kind of starts to sink in with people. It's very basic and pretty clear.
Yes.
Might take a while to sort of figure out how it works, but...
That's the kindergartnerism part of it. It actually is very basic. And in every discussion, I try to bring it right back to those two rules in the beginning because I think, it's easier for people to identify with. At least it is for me. Those are basically the two golden rules, and everything goes back to that. So, anyway, I think I had some... We're moving on, by the way. We're shifting gears right there.
We're going to move on to more... current events that I don't know anything about.
Well, no, you probably heard the Nigerian kidnapping thing. The schoolgirls. It's been a while.
Before.
Yeah, that was a while back. And the only reason I'm bringing this up is apparently I can't remember what the number was. A significant number. Hey, I'd even argue 1 is a significant number of people have just been kidnapped again in Nigeria. But my point is, I find this interesting that it's kind of often. I found it in I think a relatively obscure place. And before it was on the mainstream media, and again, I have not watched the mainstream media today, so I don't know, but I doubt if it's been reported. It's kind of, everything in that news cycle is like, woo, it's a big crescendo.
That's my attitude about the news. It was a big deal whenever government's doing something that they really don't want you to notice.
Right.
Then it just gets swept under the rug again.
Yeah, then it's
But
gone.
I'm just a conspiracy theorist, so...
Well, I'm with you, because it's the next... That was part of my blog post about the whole... I can't even remember what happened before, but I was saying it's a diversion. He came out and announced it. I got... The handlers, of course, the professional handlers, and their whole deal is we're going to, manage your popularity. So when things are going south somewhere, it's like, okay, announce this program.
When there's a really stupid story all over the news, do you ever start... checking the little headlines and trying to figure out. I instantly do that. If it's Miley Cyrus or something that is like, why does anybody care about this? I start going, all right, what are they up to?
Yeah, what's really going on? Absolutely.
I don't know. I don't know if that's really. Maybe I'm just paranoid, but that's what I do.
Absolutely. And then a couple. We're going to get to Iraq here in just a second, but I just want to do one more thing before we get there. It's actually primary day or runoff primary day in some states. I can't keep track. I guess some people keep track of it. But one of the bigger ones, that I guess of more notoriety, is Mississippi, where Thad Cochran, he's been there I think forever. He's a Republican. Is going to probably lose to this fellow, Chris McDaniel, who's apparently backed by the Tea Party. And the part I just find about this that's more interesting is I'm not a big fan of any of these people, but apparently I just like the infighting is what I like. Sarah Palin apparently is backing the Chris McDaniel, the Tea Party guy. And John McCain, I think Lindsey Graham and a few others are backing Thad Cochran. Well, of course, they've been in the Senate forever together, so they're all chums and they're watching each other's backs. I just think it's funny how, dirty politics is, and of course it's always been. But there's so many people think, well, these fellas are just trying to do their best for us. Well, they're lining their pockets. They're lining their popularity. They're building their popularity. They're watching out for number one first. And if you don't believe that, you're a little naive.
They're very interested in you, like fleas are in dogs.
Exactly. And the other thing that I wanted to say, so the GOP establishment is backing Cochran, but outside groups have poured more than $8 million into the primary, with, of course, the general election to come this fall. So only $8 million. And the latest poll, which, of course, there's probably 1,000 polls and the numbers are all different, is 52% with McDaniel, 44% with Cochran. So it looks like, according to and then I think this was a Huffington Post article that I'm citing here. You'd have to check it out. With that, I don't know. I think we should probably switch gears and go to Iraq. What do you think?
Maybe.
So what's going on in Iraq?
Well, I don't have my finger on what's going on from day to day. All I know is there's been talk that, I don't want to say talk that the United States needs to go back. They've already sent how many?
Yes.
250?
Yes.
Or, I mean, it wasn't a huge group, but yes, so more stuff going on in Iraq. So apparently it hasn't been fixed.
Yeah, I'm finding that shocking. Because I just figured it. What was they did say some. I can't remember who all it was. I think Cheney was in there, probably McCain, maybe even Lindsey Graham. They're kind of the popular thing to say now is that these guys claim it was,
suspects.
Yeah, the usuals. That this was going to be a cakewalk and it was going to kind of pay for itself because I don't know.
I love that. It's going to pay for itself.
Yeah, I mean all that stuff, and I know the people who are big supporters of these fellas. No, that was never the case.
Tell that to your kids. Right?
Yeah. It's just crazy notion. But the part of that is the same people who were in like 02, 03, 01, I don't know when the chatter really got going about this. Those same fellas who saying we got to go there and we got to go kill brown people are back on the warpath saying we got to go back to Iraq and kill brown people. Well, I don't know what percentage, some people think it was a mistake in 03 to go in. Well, hello, it's going to be the same mistake again. Ron Paul wrote an article that Brad and I talked about last week about, revisiting this, people say, well, now it's a mess and you got to go in there. And Paul was saying, no, in 11, when the withdrawal happened, that was the best thing we could have done other than never going there in the first place. But the point is, learn from the 11 withdrawal. And apparently, at least a fair chunk of people aren't getting quite
My
there.
immediate reaction when I saw what was going on, when you see that there's this unrest and all this stuff going on again in Iraq that, of course, it's going to be talk that we got to go back. And I thought, haven't we done enough to these people? It was Saddam Hussein was the big deal. Got to get him out. And he wasn't such a great guy, but at least with an iron fist, I guess pretty much it was keeping a lid on all this stuff that's going on now. And, over the course of this, what did the war last 9 years? Over the course of all that time, some of the stuff we've looked at, they said they've created so many new terrorists, in the name of kind of a war on terrorism, I guess, is why we're all these different places. It's kind of like cutting the head off a hydra, it seems like. Then there's all these problems and issues popping up everywhere. And not saying that I support that it's a good thing to have a dictator, but you just don't know if you're going to make things better. What good does it do to go into a situation where you really don't even understand the culture? We've looked at some articles about, do we really even understand what this is all about and why these groups are fighting in the first place? And Americans seem to be terribly naive about what this is and whether you can you can't go into a situation you don't understand, even if it was your right to do so.
Which brings up a lot of interesting things. You brought up Saddam Hussein, which is certainly valid to bring up, but this brings the broader picture is when I get, at least in past when I've gotten into discussions about Iraq with people, it starts to become a bit of a history lesson.
Yes. And
the argument over a history lesson is, when does history start? Like, how far do we back up the truck till we say, okay, here's the starting point?
Yeah.
You can make a whole argument right there about where do you start, and that brought up, from the number of articles that Tanya and I have been looking at, and a few I think I saw that you didn't, and you saw a few that I haven't seen. But it was interesting because it appears to be this group ISIS, or I've also seen it ISIL. I can't remember what they stand for, but Islamic State for Syria and Iraq, and I got it backwards or something. But
yeah,
it comes
I can't remember exactly what it stands for, but
so, and apparently, here we go. Islamic State of Syria and the Levant, or Levant. I don't know
what that is.
And that's ISIL, which I think is kind of the new name that's been attached to them.
Okay.
Instead of ISIS, I see it in different places. But interesting. So this now, if I understand this right, and you correct me, sounds like they're a splinter group from Al Qaeda, and these fellas are.
It said that Al Qaeda was kind of what spawned.
Yes.
This group, so I don't know exactly how that works, but
and I heard that they might have gotten pushed out a little bit because they were a little too crazy, which and that was just something I read. I don't know if that if any of that's true. Just I'm citing what I've read. But the interesting thing, what it appears from what I've read now, this is more of a Sunni, Shia, or Shiite, however you want to pronounce it, thing, rather than I don't even know how it was really portrayed. These crazy dudes from Syria coming down to Iraq for what? I don't know if I remember or anybody actually gave a good explanation of why. But this seems to be more the root of the problem, or closer to it. Anyway, yes. I don't know.
Well, and I read an article about that, and I'm not even sure if I wrote down. I don't think I wrote down the information, but I want to say that was a Huffington Post article that was about the Sunni Shiite conflict, but it talked about this jihad going on between these groups, that it goes way back to the foundations of Islam, disagreements over who should have been the successor to Muhammad, and that fight goes back so far and runs so deep, and that they said, as far as the belief in jihad within their religion, that each group has enough, that they have enough differences with each other to label each other as unbelievers, which would then mean that under jihad, that then they could kill each other. So you're not going to come into that situation, and you're not. I mean, I think Condoleezza Rice, I wish I would have quoted it here. She said they just needed to get over it.
Yeah,
how are you going to tell these people this is deeply ingrained in their religion, and it's not something that they're just going to, you're right. What were we thinking?
Yeah, this didn't just start yesterday, by the way, either. This conflict.
It's a conflict that's been going on forever, and they say that Hussein was just keeping the lid on it by brute force, and but now what we did, I guess I don't totally understand what happened, but we put the Shiites in power, which really then created these Sunni groups.
Yes.
Are very upset about that because they don't want to be ruled by the Shiites, and so now the whole conflict is stirring up again. You can't just pick one and put them over everybody else and say everybody's just got to be happy with this. So what did we expect?
Exactly.
I mean, I don't know if I'm understanding it right, but that's what, just from my research, is what's going on there.
The name of the fella who the U.S. installed, sort of, and I don't know, it was a legitimate election. Okay, whatever it was, he is a Shiite.
Yeah.
Or a Shia, however you want to pronounce it.
Yeah, this democracy stuff just didn't stick. It didn't work for them.
Yes.
They tried that, but it just wasn't for them.
Apparently the Sunnis aren't too happy by being subjected to rules from the Shiites, right? And I guess
maybe they figured out that in a democracy,
they're the minority. If
you're in the minority, that there's a problem.
Exactly. So this conflict goes back to the religious roots of it, and I was trying to find why Tanya was explaining this. I cannot keep the group straight, but one wanted only the descendants of Muhammad to be.
That's the Shiites.
The Shiites,
who
okay,
is
so
now in power, who we're supporting, I guess.
Okay, and they only wanted the descendants,
yes.
blood descendants, essentially, of Muhammad to be successors.
Right. And the Sunnis want the best man in the community, or more of a selection, I guess, rather than a nepotism thing. I don't know.
Right.
Whatever. But that's essentially The difference.
The argument there, yeah. So that's where their split happened. And before that, they were essentially one group, religion. I don't know exactly how to define it, but they were much more cohesive than they are today, to be sure. So it appears that that's part of the root of the problem. You say, okay, well, what's the problem? Can't think of, religion split apart from time to time. It happens, and they don't go killing each other. They just go, I'm going that way and going this way. And I think this is an interesting fact, and I'm going to try to find that article that I wanted to, I think it's here. So, well, why do we have this, essentially this screwed up situation right now? And I'm, God darn it, you see, when you got
all your tabs.
when you got 8,000 tabs open, it's hard. That's not the right one, I don't think. I had a section highlighted here. It was, I think I'm there. So how did this country of Iraq get formed? And again, this is, in a sense, it's cheating because I'm sort of starting at history at around 1920. But this is, I better give everybody, this is this is from National Geographic. So it's true if it's National Geographic. I'm trying to see if I can find it.
I didn't even know they had daily news. I should check that out. I need some daily news.
Authored by Eve, and I apologize, I believe it's Conant or Conant. I don't know how to pronounce her name. But I'm cheating because I'm going to cite just part of the article. But I think it's very interesting. The question is asked. Well, basically, it's a report that's asking a guy who's I think he's with Harvard University. If I read so many articles, I might be a little screwed up there. Anyway, there's a fellow who's in the area and who's an expert on the area. And they're asking him about kind of the history of what's been going on. And he did earlier in this article explain the Sunni Shia thing, and that's part of it. And of course, we also have the Kurds in the north part of Iraq.
Yeah, so that's another group. I don't know too much about them.
Yeah, so we have a number of groups, at least 3, that have been pushed together in the state of Iraq. And this is what I wanted to talk about here. It's interesting. I'm just going to read this. It says, the question is, let's step back from the current conflict for a minute. Iraq's borders were drawn in around 1920. Do those borders reflect the reality on the ground there, or just the imaginations of the Western powers that drew them? And what I'm going to get to here, hopefully I'll be smart enough to recap this again, but we're talked about free association. This is what I'd call forced association through here. And again, when you go against man's nature, it doesn't work. But here's the answer. He says, it's a very big debate among academics, to tell you the truth. It was originally part of the Ottoman Empire and divided into 3 provinces, with Basra and Baghdad in the south and center, and Mosul in the north. There's a lot of debate among academics as to how much interaction went on between the 3. Was there a notion of Iraq before Iraq? Some academics say there was, others say there wasn't. What I think is fair to say is that there were linkages between these 3 provinces, and he cites trade linkages. There was some population, cohesion, and geographic contact between different groupings, but there wasn't a state, and there weren't boundaries, because at that time it was all part of the Ottoman Empire. But here we go. We fixed this for them here. The West did. They said, after World War I, the British and French began to connive. I'm reading this. These aren't my words. And the Russians too. Go figure. To try to figure out where the state boundaries would go. There was originally the Sykes-Picot agreement, or Pickett agreement between the British and the French. They came up with some boundaries, but not the boundaries that we see today. The San Remo agreement and subsequent League of Nations agreement saw the boundaries of Iraq and Syria we see today. That brought together Baghdad, Basra, and Mosul for reasons really to do with Britain's interest. Maybe a recipe for some conflict down the road? There was a need to bring Mosul into the equation because of oil, and there was the very important notion at the time that you needed to have Mosul and Baghdad together because they're Sunni dominated in order to balance the Shiite predominance in Basra. That sectarian agenda was there from the outset. And he goes on about the Ottoman Empire, Kurdistan, the Kurds, etc. It's very interesting. I'll put the link to this on the Facebook page. But And again, so we're starting at the Ottoman Empire, and unfortunately, I'm not a historian. Is there what's before the Ottoman Empire? I know this is the Sumerians. The cradle of life is there. That's You know, the Amaji, which is the first known written word for liberty.
Yeah.
It comes from the Sumerian
Okay,
language.
Well, it's interesting because I didn't really know that history, but it looks to me like these groups, even with their differences, were just peacefully coexisting.
Bingo.
Before there were lines drawn around them, and then they had a state over them, and they were forced in association with each other. Even though, I mean, they obviously have huge differences, and if forced together, I'm thinking of like, dogs or things. I'm not
Right.
relating people to dogs. I'm just saying, if you take anyone who doesn't want to be put in a cage together, and they're going to fight.
Yeah. Force doesn't work.
Right.
I mean, that's what the libertarians are after here. The anarcho-capitalists are constantly saying, not only is it a violation of your rights, which of course it is, it doesn't work.
No.
And that's one of the arguments I know we both get is, well, as a practical matter, show me how this has worked before. And I say, well, it works every single day. You voluntarily go to work, you do your thing in exchange for cash in most cases, right? People, they send you a check. That's anarchy, ma'am.
Right.
Right?
My kids and I were struck. We just went through studying the world wars. I've mentioned that several times, but yeah, all these things, these world powers just dividing up, just taking people and just drawing lines around them and dividing up these countries and just creating whatever they want out of it. And we were so struck by it.
Yeah.
Like I said, kids really, when you raise your kids to question those kinds of things, you read that to them in a book, and they're like, "What?" It doesn't seem normal to them,
Because they're actually able to think and they're right. That's the difference.
Yep.
But, I have to admit, when I was a kid and, I didn't question why, hey, teacher, why are the lines where they are? Why? People have to stop and think for a second. And I know this is fictitious, so people are like, it hasn't happened, it'll never happen. What if the Chinese came over here and said, no, Wisconsin should have a big chunk, what we now call Iowa, should actually be part of Wisconsin? We'd go, cool. That's fine. There would be no conflict, right?
Or how about, part of, like, Texas should be just, we'll just take this piece of Mexico and we'll just include them, you don't know. Those things don't make sense, and if you don't understand what kind of conflicts might be going on there or problems.
In my personal experience, it doesn't work because I like to draw my property line, into what some people call my neighbors. It doesn't seem to work real well. The neighbors tend to object to that. I don't understand why, right?
Right.
But all of a sudden, when you do it with a national border, it should be just fine.
And if you're our neighbors and you do that, my husband will put huge piles of wood
as a barrier.
Yeah.
Right, but the point is, I'm trying to get people to understand, most people say, well, first of all, this has basically happened 100 years ago. The borders, the modern borders of Iraq, when I call them modern. So some people write it off as, well, that's old news. They're all over that. Well, I don't know if they're over it. I'm guessing now they're not over it.
So it really started the war back then, is pretty much what you're saying, right?
Yeah, because, well, as you pointed out, and again, I'm no historian, I can't tell you with any kind of proof, but it appears that these people coexisted relatively peacefully before.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying the Sunnis and the Shiites were in love with each other, but they somewhat segregated themselves. They went to certain areas and they just said, hey, we don't really like you fellas, we're going to go do our own thing over here.
Well,
cool.
Didn't Hussein used to be our buddy too?
The U.S. actually put him in power.
Him. So, I mean, didn't the U.S. just pretty much plant the seeds of all this? Then say, then Hussein's this terrible dictator. Well, put him in the first place. If they would have just been left alone.
Yes, just leave them alone. And I get it, oil is going to be the answer here. But, what's the big importance? Why should the U.S. government, why should the British government, why should the French government, why should any of these guys, anyone from the outside be drawing boundaries for someone else's country?
Right.
It's a crazy notion, right? And again...
Now, this is your ruler. Okay, you've drawn a line around you, so...
Yes.
Okay, you answer to this guy.
Right. It's just an absolutely crazy notion. And again, I try to put it in perspective. If the Chinese came over here and did that, people would object in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
But no, it's just not a big deal over there, right? It seems crazy that people would think that way.
Yeah, how do people not think that people there are just like people here?
Yes. And I would argue they don't. I don't know how. I'm with you. But they don't because, I'll just use the tired example that I always use about Madeleine Albright. When she was asked that 500 innocents, Iraqis, were killed in the war, was it worth it? And she said yes, but that's not my point here. My point is she didn't deny the 500,000.
No.
Right? She didn't go, well, it's not 500,000, it's 498. Or, right? She didn't say anything to that. She just said, no, it was worth it. So the point is, whether you want to say, and I've gotten in armies, well, it wasn't 500,000. I go, well, geez, apparently everybody else is authority on the number, and I'm not. But I'm like, let's say it's 1. That's still wrong, isn't it?
It requires you to dehumanize these other people. In order to support that, you have to be able to see them as somehow less than human, not the same as you. Those children are not your children. They're not,
they're not as valuable.
Different. Yeah.
They're definitely expendable. Ask Madeleine Albright. Right?
Yeah.
And my point is partly also that number, whatever the exact number is, I would argue it's more than 1 is too big, or more than 0, is too big. But it's not widely talked about. You might hear that U.S. soldiers, 5,000 were killed in the conflict, 30
yes.
plus
more
thousand.
Than 4,480 U.S. deaths, 32,000 wounded. I wrote all this down.
Okay.
100,000 Iraqi citizens dead.
Okay.
With a price tag of $806 billion.
Well, that was cheap.
Just the immediate price tag, not the ongoing veterans benefits or any. It doesn't even count all the aftermath. Just the immediate price tag.
And the emotional costs of these people, on and on, to the families.
Suicides, doesn't count those.
Right. Just, it's unfathomable.
Incredible.
But people don't contest, or they don't talk about that, the number of the brown people who are lost.
Right.
It's really of no consequence, and it's just, I find that really disturbing.
It bothers me. It bothers me personally as a Christian, because I hear Christians talk about, this jihad, and they're so, they're really against Muslims and jihad and all of this. But then aren't we doing the same thing when we say that just because these people are Muslims and just because they have a different religion, that it's okay to kill them? Isn't that what you're objecting to against jihad? Isn't the same thing? So if we don't believe in that, then we should say we don't kill people just because they believe differently than we do, or because maybe they have a different religion, whatever it is, that we should not do that.
Okay, but
we should stand against that.
Let me be devil's advocate to you. But wait a minute, Tanya. If we don't go over there and take care of them, they're going to kill us all here. They've already said they want to kill us.
They said they want to kill us.
A
lot of people say stuff. Well, I think the question is, can they really do that?
Yep.
We've talked about this before. Just like you said, if you say your neighbor really hates you and says he's going to do something to you or whatever, do you have the right to engage in a preemptive strike and bomb his house and kill the guy? I mean, you have to have some kind of proof that he's actually doing something and has the capability to do it, and he's going to do it. Right. In other words, it has to be a real threat. Right. Okay. And you say, well, what's the threshold? I've had this discussion. Well, how do you know what the threshold is for a real threat? Well, the point is, if I take preemptive action, I'm taking a risk. Why? Because at some point, an impartial third party might have to decide, wait, was Tom the invader? Or was the other guy the invader, right? And it would behoove me to have a whole bunch of, video or, evidence of some sort to prove my case. Well, and Americans are, seem to make that argument. But are the American people really holding their government to that kind of a standard that they have to give them that kind of proof before they let them send their sons and daughters over to die in another war? No way. That's even a crazier notion that, and this is poor thought on my part, but I kind of see people supporting the war. But then what happens when you have a son who's of age, even a daughter who's of age, and you support them in sending them there? Now I'm really tipped in the ditch there. I'm lost. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I know. And we talked in our show about the warfare state. It's an emotional topic, and it hits home with everybody. But I know that the military were some of the greatest supporters of Ron Paul. They're starting to, I think, have objections even themselves, and I know that, at least, not that this is proof positive, but I know that my husband and my brother-in-law both have been involved in all these conflicts in the Middle East, and they both are now libertarians. So, I mean, I guess just a little bit of just, what do they call it? Anecdotal proof there that, I mean...
Well, it's the same...
If you've been there, I mean, a lot of people that have been there are saying, no, we don't want to go back. This isn't accomplishing anything.
Well, I think part of the problem with... Earlier we cited, Cheney and Lindsey Graham and John McCain about... Basically, they can't... If they say now we shouldn't go in, they would essentially be admitting that they were wrong in 2003, that we shouldn't have gone in, right?
Yes, that was one thing I wrote in my notes, was that they never go back and admit that they're wrong.
Right.
It's always move forward and just do something else. Keep trying to fix. Just act like,
through violence.
Yeah, we're going to just keep doing the same thing. Like, what is that? If you keep on doing what you've always done, you keep on getting what you've always gotten. It's that. They never go back and say, we're sorry. We screwed up.
Right.
We made a huge mistake. We were totally wrong to go there in the first place. What politician ever says that?
Right. It's not going to happen. But my point...
Unless I get caught doing something like...
hand in the cookie jar.
Yeah, well, or some personal indiscretion, then
right.
then it's tearful, you know.
They get the sympathy vote there, then.
Yeah, then they're always repenting. And
well, you're talking about the soldiers saying that had been there, some of them saying, hey, I think it was a mistake, the whole thing we shouldn't have done that. And I give those people credit for essentially saying, hey, I changed my position. I don't know. I know a couple of them personally, but I don't by any stretch intend to speak for the group of them. But I think in general, it's hard for somebody to say, hey, I believe I had a principled position back, whatever it was, in 2003, and now I believe I have a better position in 2014, and I can see that I was wrong in 2003. And when I say I can definitely give people credit for that, because obviously here's politicians who can't do that.
It's kind of a huge thing when you look at all the members of the military that seem to be shifting libertarian. That, I mean, most people who go into that situation go in very patriotic, very much supporting government. And for that to be the case, when I saw the numbers of people supporting Ron Paul in the military, I thought, wow, that's a huge thing, because that's a big change
Absolutely.
in mindset of people that are in the military. I don't know, but it seemed like a big deal to me.
Yeah, it definitely is. I'm citing an article from Reason.com, and I'll cite the author here in a second. But he's talking about this whole the circumstance essentially that we're in right now. Let's see, Mark Thiessen, a former speechwriter for Bush. He says, he wrote in Wednesday's Washington Post, sorry, but this is a mess of President Obama's making. Okay, and of course you expect politicians, well, it was the other dude.
No, it's Bush's fault. No, it's Obama. Bush started it. Well, Obama didn't finish it right.
But the author of this, it's a common refrain among unrepentant hawks. In a piece titled What Obama Has Wrought in Iraq, Thiessen's American Enterprise Institute colleague Danielle Pletka insists that when the United States fled Iraq in 2011, the country was stable, reasonably integrated, and on the road to new prosperity and unprecedented freedom. Well, McCain goes on to say, we had it won. Thanks to the 2007 troop surge, President Barack Obama had inherited a strong Iraq, only to squander it rushing to the exits. So, of course, those people who beat the drum for more war are saying, well, the problem was we left, and that we didn't continue to stay over there and kill people. And again, I think of the course of our argument here is, it of course matters that you go over there and kill people. The point is that won't fix the problem, because the problem underlying is this Sunni, Shia, Kurdish, and maybe more conflict. Why is this? There's conflict intensified because of those state boundaries that were drawn over these people. And like you said, more important than the state boundary is, and you dudes are all going to be ruled by this one guy who happens to be either a Kurd, a Sunni, a Shia, right? He's got to be one of those things. And the other people aren't going to like that, right? Whichever group our leader is associated with, we aren't going to like if I'm from a different group.
What's that quote about, like, if you don't know history, you're doomed to repeat it, or something? We don't look back and say, what are the seeds of this, and how did this happen, and how did we get here, and how do we not do that again?
The take I like on that statement is from, well, I originally heard it from my friend who's the professor at Carthage College, Yuri Maltsev. He says the one lesson of history is it teaches us nothing.
Yes.
Right, which is a fantastic statement, because it just seems so true. We see the same thing, we go over and over. This article says we've spent $25 billion over the last decade building up the Iraq, and of course you're going to get different numbers from different authors, but it's a big number. And I just always find it funny how some people will argue with it. Well, it's not 25 billion, it's 27 or it's 23 or... Oh my goodness.
If there's a billion after it...
It's a big number.
Yeah.
Any number with a million after is a big number
right.
for me. Anyway, I think what's important for us to close with here today is get people to understand that this conflict is no conflict is solvable by more conflict, right? Obama has said, hey, we're not going to put boots on the ground. Apparently, in real short order, that got turned around. And I know we don't call the United States government, the state doesn't call them boots on the ground. They're advisors, they're consultants, Well,
I asked Luke, my husband, if they said they were going to advisors or training. So they're just going to go over there and teach some classes and just kind of, okay, give them some instruction and then just go... You go.
Go get them.
Is that how this works? That's what these guys are going to do? That just struck me as a little bit silly. Like, we're just going to give them some good advice. Well, couldn't you just do that? Like, couldn't you just text them or something?
It's just funny how people think this might work. Next was drones.
Of course.
Are coming. And
drones.
We could do a whole show on drones alone. Right? All these things that they're contemplating or have done or in the process of doing, it's just going to make things worse. Ron Paul said this on the floor of the House years ago. He cited, I can't remember when it was, and he says they didn't listen to him then. There's no hope necessarily that they'll listen to him now, although he keeps trying to send the message of peace.
Well, and you had the article also that you had sent me about the 3 new nations. Had the guy just kind of making the argument that Iraq is a failed state to just allow these 3 different groups just to divide themselves along whatever lines they want to and just kind of secede from each other. That would be that basically just and there was a whole thing there kind of making an argument saying they're only going to take this so far and kind of saying that most likely they would just divide along their ideological lines or whatever. And so, it was a good argument saying that even though the U.S. probably created the mess in the first place, probably still just to leave it alone.
Absolutely. Let them secede. Let them divvy up their own country their own way and basically live essentially how they did in the Ottoman Empire when they were largely living peacefully next to each other.
And hopefully there's a chance that maybe they could go back to something similar before all this mess. I guess that would be the best possible outcome. I liked his quote here. Can I read that? I just thought it was a good quote. The whole world is still suffering terribly from the insane absurdities of the legacies from centuries of Western imperialism that hobble together all kinds of crazy quilt states from ancient nations that do not want to be married in perpetuity. That was Jack D. Douglas was that on Lou Rockwell?
Yes, that was one
the
of the
article,
articles.
3 new nations,
Yes.
Shia land, Kurdistan, and Sunni land.
Yeah.
So I just liked that quote. It's a crazy quilt.
Forced association.
Yeah.
I support free association as a libertarian, but apparently that's a crazy notion. That could never work, they say. So anyway, with that, we're going to let you go. Hopefully we've inspired some thoughts. Do some research. We'll post more links on the Facebook page.
I didn't write them down. We'll just have to wing it.
Please comment and let us know what you think. And let us know how crazy we are. With that, we'll let you go. Look forward to speaking again next week, talking to everybody. And I have to thank, of course, Tanya for joining me. It was absolutely a pleasure, as always.
Well, thank you.
You bring some interesting insight, and I really enjoy it.
Thanks. It's always interesting.
It is. With that, good night, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.